All right, let's talk about something that sounds like it's straight out of a political thriller. What happens when the world's most powerful military alliance just turns on itself? Today, we're going to explore a scenario that, yeah, sounds pretty unbelievable, but it really pulls back the curtain on just how fragile global stability is. The question is, what if the United States invaded Greenland?
So let's really unpack this. What if the US, the leader of NATO, actually decided to invade Greenland? Now, here's the kicker you have to remember. Greenland isn't its own country. It's an autonomous territory of Denmark. And Denmark is a founding member of NATO. So an invasion isn't just an act of aggression. No, it's one NATO member attacking another NATO member. And that would set off an absolutely catastrophic chain reaction.
Okay, so the first domino to fall, and this one would fall fast, it would be NATO itself. An American invasion of Greenland, it wouldn't just, strain the alliance. It would force it into this impossible, completely self-destructive crisis. We're talking about tearing apart the very foundation of Western security as we know it.
You see, at the very heart of NATO is this one little thing called Article 5. It's not just a rule, it's the glue, the absolute core principle that holds the whole thing together. And it's simple. An attack on one is an attack on all. That promise, that idea of collective defense, is what's kept the peace in Europe for more than 70 years. But what on earth happens when the attacker is the most powerful member of the club? And this is where it gets just completely nuts. Denmark obviously would invoke Article 5 that forces every single NATO country, we're talking the UK, France, Germany, Canada, all of them, to make a choice that is just impossible. So do they honor the treaty and go to war to defend Denmark from the US, or do they side with their biggest, most powerful ally, who is now the bad guy? I mean, there's just no good answer, no winning move at all.
And here's something that makes this even more explosive. This isn't just some abstract, theoretical problem. There's a literal tripwire on the ground right now. You've got soldiers from other European nations stationed in Greenland. So an American invasion, it wouldn't just be hitting Danish territory. It would mean US troops would immediately be killing Allied soldiers. That would almost certainly trigger a hot war on day one.
So, what's the result of all this? Well, let's be crystal clear. Even if by some miracle a full-blown war between the US and Europe was avoided, the alliance would be dead. It's over. The fundamental trust that makes NATO work would be completely shattered, gone forever. And just like that, the most successful military alliance in history would simply cease to exist.
So with NATO in ruins, the second domino starts to topple, and this one creates a massive power vacuum on the world stage. Suddenly, the world becomes a much more dangerous place. We're talking almost overnight. Think about it. The United States would be totally isolated from its allies, completely tangled up in a crisis it started. Other world powers, they'd see this as a golden opportunity. First up, you've got China. They might look at the chaos and think, this is it. This is our best chance to move on Taiwan, betting that the rest of the world is too busy and too fractured to do anything about it.
And it wouldn't stop there, of course. The chaos would just keep spreading. With NATO effectively paralyzed, Russia would likely see a big green light to put even more pressure on its neighbors in Eastern Europe. Why? Because that collective security guarantee, the one that kept them safe, it's now completely worthless.
The diplomatic fallout for the US would be, swift and absolutely brutal. Its closest friends, the countries it stood with for decades, the UK, Canada, France, Germany, they'd have no choice but to treat the US as a hostile nation. And over at the UN, the US would have to use its veto to block its own condemnation. That move alone would undermine the UN's authority and basically cement America's new status as a global pariah.
But wait, it gets worse. The consequences don't just stop with military alliances and diplomacy. Nope, the third domino is economic, and honestly, it could be just as devastating as the first two. A massive, all-out transatlantic trade war would be pretty much inevitable.
The European Union, one of America's biggest trading partners, would have to hit back with crippling sanctions. And when I say crippling, I mean it. We're talking about a complete meltdown of global supply chains. All transatlantic flights would be grounded. Billions, maybe trillions in financial assets would be frozen. The economic pain would be immediate and it would be immense.
So what's the likely outcome of all that? A global market crash. The sheer chaos and the complete severing of ties between two of the world's biggest economic blocs. It's a recipe for disaster. Trust in the US economy would just evaporate. And that could even challenge the US dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. A true economic catastrophe.
Okay, wow. After walking through that absolute nightmare cascade of collapsing dominoes, it's probably time for a reality check. Let's pull back from the brink for a second and look at the very real reasons why this whole scenario is, incredibly unlikely to ever happen. So,
the big question is, right, if the consequences are so clearly catastrophic for everyone, especially the United States, why would this even be a thought experiment? Well, the answer, funnily enough, lies in a kind of dusty old treaty.
And here it is. This is the key to the whole thing. It's called the 1951 Defense Treaty. It's an agreement between the US and Denmark that already gives the United States pretty much everything it could ever want from Greenland. This treaty gives the US the right to operate super important military bases there, like the Pituffik Space Base.
Let's just break this down. Look at America's main goals for Greenland. They want an early missile warning system, right? Well, they already have it. Goal met. They want a strategic military presence in the Arctic? Check. The treaty guarantees that. They want to operate their bases freely? Check again. The point is, there is absolutely no strategic reason to invade. They've already got what they need.
And that brings us to the bottom line, really. An invasion is the definition of a lose-lose scenario. The United States would be throwing away the stable, secure access it already has. And for what? Global isolation, economic ruin, and the total destruction of its own national security. It would be a truly catastrophic act of self-sabotage. And that kind of leaves us with one last pretty sobering thought. What we've talked about today shows just how quickly a single reckless act could unravel the entire world order. But it also shows that the main thing stopping that chaos is just an agreement. It's a promise, written on a piece of paper over 70 years ago. And that really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In a world where powers are always shifting, just how strong are the pieces of paper that hold everything together?